Let me know your questions and in comments. Here you are. Well, as I said, as I told you, we have already checked some theories. And we start with Brunner. Routines, remember? Little rituals, scaffolding, and the importance of language for learning. Well, there are certain implications when we think of language as the main vehicle for learning to take place. And for us language teachers, well, and language learners, the use of the target language in the classroom might have a couple of advantages, but also disadvantages. It would be nice if we first discuss the advantages and disadvantages as well as situations that may occur in our classroom or that have happened in our classrooms according to our experience as learners, because that's gonna help us dimension the role of language. Well, one of the advantages for using the L2 is the input. And by the way, for Krashen, input needs to be comprehensible and suitable. And that's one of the most important hypotheses he states. So exposure could be an advantage because you can bring suitable input in your classroom. And when we talk about input and exposure to language, we're talking about videos, material, books, guests, native speakers. You can also think of audios, media, text. However, we might find constraints regarding the exposure, and that is that in certain contexts, the use of L2 might take longer time in order to explain and for instructions to be understood. There are strategies you can follow for dealing with these potential constraints. However, it could be a disadvantage, you know. Instead of spending 2 minutes in giving instructions, you might spend 15 minutes or 10 minutes trying to explain, you know, what children need to do, what teenagers have to carry out, or what adults need to do. Another of the advantages of the use of the target language in the classroom is that some students might feel motivated to use the L1, and they might feel confident enough to imitate your sounds or the sounds of the classmates or the sounds of the recording of the tapes, of the videos, you know, and that has to do with personality types as well. But the use of L2 might enhance their participation in L2 as well. On the other hand, there are some other students who might feel frightened, anxious, nervous, scared even, for using the L2 in the classroom at all times. And that's something usually happens in any level of education. Whether teachers use the L2 in kindergarten, elementary school, junior high school, senior high school, university. So that's a you know, that could be a disadvantage for some of them who have not been involved with the language and well, really need to build rapport and construct bounds in order to feel confident enough. Now, another advantage that is related to the exposure of the language is that it's meaningful and it's real language in use. So for foreign language contexts, the use of L2 in the classroom, well, is key, is vital, fundamental, because that's gonna be the room for using the L2 and for being in touch with the L2. Then, well, you can go home and watch films, videos, and etc. Or you can surf the net and meet up new friends there online. But it's not gonna be in a systematic way, as in a predictable way, as Krashen suggests, that grammar and learning languages should go regarding his hypothesis. We're going to check that in a moment. Now, one disadvantage could be the low teacher's English level and to provide with role models. So one of the potential strategies we could follow here is to certify our language, okay? And it has to do a continuous exercise we professionals of the language need to carry out. We need to certify our B1 level, B2 level, C1 level, C2 level, and then to continue working on our language, because that's lifelong learning. Language is alive, changes constantly, and we need to keep on working on our language so that we can provide with, effective modules for the students to follow. Another advantage could be the use of routines. And according to Bronner, the use of routines, if you can remember, are kind of little rituals in which you could take advantage in order to provide with chunks of language. So instructions could be one way to work on routines systematically and introducing new language to learners step by step in a systematic manner. One of the disadvantages of using the L2 for giving instructions, following routines, and providing with collocations might be the lack of reflection for beginners. And according to the age, of course, if we're talking about teenagers, critical thinking is going to be hard to take place sometimes, if we are thinking of our context here, when we have 40 people in a single classroom and in very energetic people, right? Reflection on the language is going to be difficult to take place as well. So, well, this lack of reflection is going to be a process, a long process, and we actually go through that process by following different rhythms. But it could be one of the disadvantages that you need to take into consideration for the content of your courses, for the content of your classes, for designing your lessons, activities, and tasks. Because nowadays, critical thinking and higher order thinking skills are fundamental. They are really important for us to develop as people and to develop personally and professionally. And well, another advantage could be motivation that was already discussed with the students' confidence. They might feel comfortable with the use of L2 in the classroom at all times. I can remember that most of the generations I've been teaching in the strategies course, let's say a good percentage of people have been comfortable with the L2 in the classroom, but there are some others who decide to give up for different reasons. And in order to avoid dropping out, to avoid students to give up, we might find procedures and strategies to approach them, and that's the use of strategies according to Krashen, or according to some other authors and scholars, the use of L1, when we are sharing the same mother tongue. We're going to check it, the pros and cons. Fluency at an early stage is going to be graded. That's going to be one of the advantages. And a disadvantage could be that you are not able to cover all the units of your course or the syllabus design that was established at the beginning, nor the curriculum design. Okay, so that is one of the external factors that could be affecting teaching and learning processes. Remember that teaching needs to take into consideration internal and internal factors. One of the most important external factors for your teaching is going to be the fact that it's a job. And although you have this vocation for teaching, some of you want to become teachers, some of you want to become translators or interpreters or researchers or writers, right? But you need to cover expectations. You need to cover certain units in the teaching or a program, and well, those expectations need to be covered if you want to keep on working and if you want to keep the job, right? That's another external factor and a disadvantage of using the L2 in the classroom that could take longer than expected. And of course, it's not about, you know, selecting the most suitable students for keeping on studying, but to include every single one in order to learn by following their rhythms. Now, the use of the mother tongue in specific situations and contexts represent, according to some authors, a potential solution. One situation that might occur in a classroom is that the student is upset. Okay, they feel angry for several reasons, because of your teaching methodology, because of your personality, or because of your grades, many factors. Okay, and when you're working with beginners, you need to build rapport, and in order to demonstrate sympathy, to be empathetic and closeness, the use of L1 and to talk individually to them by using the L1 might work most of the times, according to some authors, okay, such as Moon and Carol Reed. Another situation might be the students who know the answer of a question that the teacher asks, you know, and they use the L1 in order to answer and respond. Well, they show knowledge, they show understanding, you know, and that could be beneficial for the procedure of the class, you know, for the class itself, for the lesson. It usually happens with children, you know, when you're explaining things and they understand everything you say and they decide to keep silent or to answer by using their mother tongue. Another situation might be when students want to express a real experience. Okay, they want to communicate a message, what they experienced and was really insightful for them, meaningful for them, and they start speaking by using the mother tongue. Well, that's another situation we might face. When teachers or students want to joke in order to build rapport, that's also very important. And remember that this pragmatic skill is going to be a long process for students to develop. Checking understanding, that's another situation, okay? For checking understanding, you could approach students individually and might use the L1 for monitoring. You know, we're going to check the monitor hypothesis of Krashen. It's very different from the use of L1, but for monitoring in a contextualized manner and in a close way. And the use of metacognitive strategies such as organization, self-reflection, awareness, and consciousness. Well, the use of L1 might assist language learning in order to structure the ways in which they are going to study. Now, according to Krashen, that's a very different story. According to Krashen, the use of L2 should be employed at all times in the classroom for everything. And for the students to keep motivated, you know, or for being motivated, you might make use of an affective filter. Okay, so he took into consideration the affective domain, the different learning theories we explored, the factor of language and the role it plays for human beings, and, you know, linguistic processes such as learning, acquisition, and an interaction with language. He has been focused on the study of bilingualism and foreign language learning, you know, very interesting. Mexican people living in the United States and Mexican people who came back to Mexico. And he found it very interesting to observe and study the processes that people follow in order to acquire language. And he was wondering whether language acquisition could take place in foreign language contexts. And that's why his hypothesis started becoming turning points for certain scholars. He came to Mexico in 2013 to carry out research and to give a couple of lectures, and he actually played the role of a turning point for a couple of professors here in Mexico. Well, according to Krashen and his hypothesis on acquisition and learning, language acquisition is a subconscious process for approaching language. Language acquisition takes place. Sorry, take a sip. The moment a person understands everything that is being said to them. Language acquisition is to understand everything that is written. Okay? At least the main message. Language acquisition is a natural born process. It's a skill we got, okay, since we're born. On the other hand, for Krashen, language learning is it's a conscious process in which you learn language by means of writing lists, vocabulary charts, designing flashcards, working on your memory-related skills, compensatory strategies, and it has to do with the direct approach of strategies, in which you become conscious of language, the processes of the language. And this is something adults can do very well because we use our critical thinking and we can actually achieve this metalinguistic competence. That is, knowing about the language, that what Richards and Rogers call to know about the language. We know how it works, okay? This is a process that takes time, you know, it's a process that could be systematic, schematic, structured, and organized. Adults who want to learn a foreign language or a second language go through the process of learning. They need explanations, they need certain situations and rational for learning. The important thing here is that according to Krashen, everybody is able to acquire language. Not only children are able to acquire it, but teenagers, adults, and young adults are too. How are they able to acquire the language? And here, language acquisition starts developing a different definition of the process. Language acquisition can be developed, can work for individuals by means of one of its most important hypotheses, by means of comprehensible input. Comprehensible input is a receptive process, in which students get information from people, from the environment, from the context, from the territory, from culture, from society, or in the classroom. The role of the teacher is to include it in the classroom for acquiring the language, so that the student is so involved in the content, in the task, in the activity, that they even forget they are focusing on the language. Of course, another role of the teacher is to shed light on the language goal and to use strategies such as noticing, to stop and concentrate on what is important regarding the language goal. But according to Krashen, everybody is able to acquire the language by means of comprehensible input instead of memorizing chunks of words. We're going to check a comprehensible input in the following picture. If you can remember, we explored the ZPD by Vygotsky, another dimension of intelligence, individuality, and how a more knowledgeable peer is able to help the child to actually learn. We also explore the instructional strategy of scaffolding with Brunner, and how scaffolded tasks are likely to work for learning to take place. And here we have the comprehensible input in a similar illustration, in a similar pic. And you could see that the information that is provided and it's included for language acquisition needs to be suitable, contextualized. So learner variables, contexts, and everything we explore in Unit 1 is relevant and important for comprehensible input to work. We don't want students to feel overwhelmed, demotivated, anxious, stressed, or to lose interest at all, because that would be too challenging for them. And we don't want them, of course, to feel, underestimated. And this is something I could check in your response papers. Some of you were talking about a proficiency level and in the age factor for teaching and learning. And well, you actually share the idea that effective teachers are the ones who control the tasks so that they can keep the interest and the focus on the task, the focus of the class, instead of overwhelming students, and instead of making them feel bored. This is comprehensible input, something that is interesting, relevant, meaningful challenging to a certain extent, and useful for them. Okay. There is one concept by Krashen called the silent period, in which everything is receptive. All the information and the input you're providing with is received by students, and this usually happens in childhood. According to Krashen, it happens in childhood. But he also states that is a period in which students receive information from the teacher at any stage, and they wait until the very moment they feel confident enough and secure to produce language. They are learning, of course, because they are receiving the input, and eventually they will develop productive skills. They will develop productive strategies in order to provide with message. This may have been observed by yourself, you know, with your classmates, with yourself, with your students in case you're teaching. And it's very important to understand the process of the silent period, because that's gonna be moving you in terms of material, tasks, and units. Okay, you're gonna make decisions according to this stage your students are facing, and as well as language goals and the external factors. So this silent period has got implications for teaching and learning, because once you understand this stage, you make decisions that are likely to be beneficial for your classroom and for learning, which is the main focus. These are the 5 hypotheses established by Krashen. The acquisition learning hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, which is very interesting, and it has to do with personality types, and how the monitor hypothesis interestingly works in order to balance your language acquisition device on the one hand, and the predictable rules of language, how to use language. We're going to check personality types and the monitor hypothesis in what follows. The natural order hypothesis, which has to do with how grammar is learned. This is going to be very important for Unit 2, to take it into consideration for your activities. Grammar could be learned in a deductive fashion, in an inductive way, by using a communicative approach, or by focusing on the language acquisition device and the monitor hypothesis in order to make it predictable and to construct your own language, not language, but your own grammar rules. Of course, we have a system already, and the system is there. But for grammar to develop and to understand the nature of grammar, students might be able to go for patterns, you know, facts, and in different strategies to learn grammar. We're going to check that in Unit 2, by the way, and in the natural order hypothesis. The comprehensible input hypothesis, well, that has already been explored. And one final one, which is the affective filter. Let's go for the summary of acquisition and learning hypothesis. But before that, I brought this quotation: the best language teaching activities or tasks are those in which students become so completely absorbed that they forget they are learning another language. This is one of the contributions of Krashen. Content is very important then. Acquisition is the result of a subconscious process, very similar to the one we face when learning when acquiring the L1. Okay, so it's very similar to the way we started producing, we understood, and we communicate. Learning, on the other hand, is the outcome of formal instruction, and it involves a conscious process which results in conscious knowledge about the language, the mechanics, the metalinguistic competence. Grammar is there, you know, syntax, morphology, explanations, arguments. Now, this is very interesting. According to Krashen, the monitor hypothesis explains the relationship between acquisition and learning, two different processes, and defines the influence of learning on acquisition. So he somehow divides our brains for acquisition and learning. The monitoring function is the practical result of the learned grammar. Here we have the influence. According to him, the language acquisition device is the utterance initiator, is the starter. And he got the idea of Chomsky, you know, if you remember in the 1970s, and you explored the video I shared with you with Jeannie's case again. This language acquisition device is a natural born skill in human beings. So for Krashen, the acquisition system, you know, is there on one side of your brain. This is an analogy, while the learning system performs the role of the guide and the corrector. It monitors. And then, you know, we have different kinds of personalities for the monitor to work. We have monitor users, over users, under users, and balanced users. He distinguishes over users as you know, the ones who use the monitor all the time. Under users, the ones who have not learned or who prefer not to use the conscious knowledge. And learners that use the monitor appropriately are the ones who are balanced. So just an illustration of this, you know, could be a division between the language acquisition device on the one hand, and on the other hand, you know, the monitor, which is all the learning processes of grammar, structure, systematization, cognition. Of course, both are cognitive exercises that complement each other. This is quite related to the personality types we check with John, you know, from psychology. And they have certain characteristics. Okay, so Krashen also focused on psychological processes, language phenomena, and also social affairs. You will see that on the affective filter. Another of Krashen's theories is the natural order, in which grammar is learned in a predictable manner. Here, you know, patterns might emerge, facts and options. Options are related to the rules already established by grammar, by language itself, you know, the general system we follow, and that was created by means of culture and the merge of culture and society. For a given language, some grammatical structures tend to be acquired early while others late. This also has to do with the personality of learners, the variables such as age, the background, you know, and then we can find, sorry, a couple of sociology and anthropology related affairs, exposure and input conditions, environment, context, and more elements for the natural order hypothesis. Krashen points out that the implication of the natural order hypothesis is not that a language program syllabus should be based on the order found in the studies, you know, in the background and all the factors around. In fact, he discusses the grammatical sequencing when the goal is language acquisition. So for him, you know, acquisition and his hypothesis on both learning and acquiring is going to be the pivotal effect, you know, for grammar to take place systematically and progressively. Well, the input hypothesis has already been discussed. It's all the information that enhances linguistic competence. It has to be contextualized according to students' needs and characteristics. Natural communicative input is the key to designing a syllabus, to designing a class, to designing an activity, you know, or even a warm-up, and needs to be integrated for being effective for a whole group or for a specific person. Finally, the affective filter hypothesis includes a number of effective variables such as emotions, feelings, moods, that enhance language acquisition and make it more feasible. Motivation, self-confidence, anxiety, stress, sadness, you know, or energy in the classroom, make up the affective filter. And how to work on those emotions and the whole emotional dimension of teaching and learning languages might lead learning, whether to success or failure. Those students who are capable of working with the affective filter are actually more likely to succeed in second language acquisition. Of course, this has to do with personality again, emotional intelligence, and our previous experiences with learning and the environment for learning, you know. A nice classroom atmosphere is very important for students to feel comfortable and to have room for emotions to take place, but to be able to work on those emotions. So the affective filter had been underestimated, but Krashen shed light on it again, I mean, in his work, and it could be seen, it could be actually present in our context. If you take a look at grades, you know, if you take a look at the washback effect when taking exams and how your emotions are affected by learning. A good example could be, you know, your grades and your scores, your performance regarding the task we have been carrying out during this unit 1. Everybody wants to check their grades, if they're doing right, they're doing wrong, how they are feeling and whether they are learning or not. and to work with those emotions is also important for your activities. And well, praising, recognizing work, uh, keeping communication with the students is very important. And the dialogue you just had regarding this pre-correction exercise, well, feedback, feedback for classmates was in order to enhance this affective filter as well, and to understand what others are doing and why they are doing it, for acknowledging the context you're in, you know, why the establishment of tasks, why the guidelines, and what we are doing, you know, regarding our studies. Well, finally, we have this blog quotation by Krashen. The effective language teacher is someone who can provide input and help make it comprehensible in a low anxiety situation. This is a summary of Krashen's hypothesis. In a nutshell, we can see here his work and the roles of the teacher, the roles of the language, the roles of people by means of interaction and in terms of learning and acquisition. On Monday, I'm gonna be sending you an email for sharing a couple of papers by Krashen so that you can read a little bit more. They are gonna be fundamental for the following activities. We're going to check how to teach grammar, the nature of grammar, how to teach vocabulary, you know, the nature of lexis, different ways, whether control practice, uh, inductive approaches, deductive approaches, a communicative approach for teaching grammar, and you're gonna have to think of an activity and design activities for learning and teaching grammar by reflecting on all the phenomena that needs to be taken into consideration when designing activities and tasks. Okay, so the following tasks are gonna be reduced in terms of amount of activities, but they're gonna be more complex and more elaborated. So you need more time to design them. So on Monday, I'm gonna be including the activities you need to carry out with the specific guidelines, instructions, and the time you will have in order to carry out the tasks. Okay, we're going to focus on Harmer's book, Harmer's work, but we have the basis already. We have L1 acquisition theories, we have L2 learning theories, we also have learning, broad learning theories, and the variables to take into consideration for going over the skills and sub skills of the language. Okay, so I think, in my personal opinion, we have successfully explored the topics of Unit 1. Okay, now I would like to listen to you. If you have any questions or if you have some comments, it would be nice to hear you. Okay.
Teacher,
Yeah, Alex.
regarding the use of mother tongue when teaching, I wonder what could we do when we cannot use the mother tongue because we don't know it. For example, we were teaching English or Spanish in China and we don't know Chinese.
Well, in that case, Alex, you know, the use of L1 cannot be one element to take into consideration. When you're teaching English as a second language in a context where you have multicultural students, let's say you teaching English in the United States, where you have multicultural people from Asia, from people from Russia, people from different places around the world, there is no other way but to use the lingua franca, you know, and that is to use English. Um, the use of L1 is not going to be included for uh, diminishing anxiety, for dealing with stress, or for solving any behavioral problem in the classroom or potential constraint. But what you need to do is to remember what you read regarding Crystal and how, you know, this lingua franca, and that was one of the topics you could have chosen for your response paper, the benefits of a lingua franca. And one of those benefits, you know, that it's very clear to me and that was very clear for the course, is that it helps you to share your thoughts, to share your background, okay? Some languages might be in danger and people might become lazy regarding learning foreign languages. But that's just a sentimental feeling, because indeed, you know, well, that's my argument. You are able to share your culture, your ideas, your background by means of the L2, by means of a lingua franca, you know, by means of a global language. And you are actually enriching and to a certain extent fostering your culture, you know. My accent, for example, is Mexican. I have this Mexican accent. I've been abroad, you know, I've been abroad. I've been to Southampton, Exeter. I did my master's there. Um, I went to Scotland, you know. I went to Edinburgh for my PhD. And of course, you know, when I was there, I started speaking with a different accent. But once I came back, my accent is Mexican and it will keep being Mexican because I didn't develop the ability for code switching and for accent related affairs. And that's, you know, something I really understand and I really want to share around the world. And it's, you know, just amazing, it's just brilliant the way you can share your background, your culture, your thoughts, your ideas, your research results, the data that has emerged by doing research and publications and lectures around the world. And you know, I have it very clear, and it's helped me a lot when I go to workshops. You know, I've been teaching Asian people, you know, people from India. I've been teaching people from Greece, and this global language actually helps. You know, it helps to recognize yourself, to recognize others, and to deal with difficult situations in the classroom. And that's one of the main ideas of Krashen, you know, because for Krashen, the use of L1 is not helpful. For Krashen, the use of L2 and comprehensible input is going to be the pivotal effect for acquisition to take place. Okay, so what happens when we cannot use the L1? Well, you need to take advantage of the global language, and it's even more beneficial. Do you remember the classes we attended in strategies? I don't know if you can remember, Alex, but I did not speak Spanish at all. You know, I didn't use it, not once, for anything. And it wasn't necessary, you know. And we had students who had no contact with English at all. You know, secondary school, high school, yeah, but we all know the context, right? And they succeeded. You know, they started understanding, they developed a couple of strategies in order to keep up with the rhythm, but they did it. So it was more beneficial, but it all depends on your approach, on your training. And now everything starts making sense here. How you learned English, what you learning for, you know, what you learned it for, how you were trained to teach English, you know, what postgraduate degrees you do, what is the approach you're following, what approaches have you come up with, what kinds of research you have done. So everything actually it builds your professional identity and makes you make decisions for teaching, you know, whether the use of L1, the use of L2, but you need to read what others have done. You need to read what other contexts include in the education agenda, of course. I mean, you need to be well informed, and then you make decisions according to your context. In the end, you know, in the field of teaching, you just start evolving as a professional once you experience things in the classroom. Although you know all the theory, you know, once you're there in the classroom or you start teaching online, is when you really evolve as a professional, because you can know about a blended learning, you can read about flipped classroom, you can read about the communicative approach, but it's, you know, easier said than done, right? So that's what I can tell you. Thank you for your query, Alex, as usual. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a comment or something that really wants to share? Besides the complexity of writing a response paper in 250 words, which is very difficult. Not really, right? Well, I appreciate it for your time, for the efforts you're making, for your development. I think we are doing very well. Unit 1 was already covered. Wait for my email, okay? I'm gonna be sending you an email on Monday, and you will have enough time to work, and I'm gonna give you the instructions and the papers I told you I was going to share with you. If you don't have any more comments, I guess we could stop the session here, and well, we keep in touch on Monday. Okay, have a lovely weekend, take care, keep safe, and well, we'll see each other soon.
Thank you, teacher. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you
teacher.
very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, teacher.
Warm hugs for everybody. Thank you for your work. I appreciate it.
Teacher. Bye. Bye.
Bye, bye, bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, bye, bye.
Bye, teacher.
Bye, 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 Alex. Haniel, sorry, Haniel, and Alex as well. Bye.